Welcome into Steelers Talk. I'm your host, Jack Sperry. Today, we're going to be talking about what the Pittsburgh Steelers can consider at the quarterback position if Aaron Rodgers retires. Obviously, the team is banking on Rodgers to be their starting quarterback as it stands right now, but, until he signs on that dotted line, retirement is still a possibility. And what if he goes down that road? What should the Steelers do? We're going to talk about some of the possibilities on today's edition of Steelers Talk. But before we get into it here, like the video, if you want the Rodgers saga to finally be over, all right? We have been here since March, waiting for Rodgers to sign, and now it's mid-May. So if I want this thing to end, if you're with me on that, make sure you guys click that thumbs up icon for a free and easy way to help out the show. And, if I'm being honest here, guys, it's very possible that the plan that the Steelers have, if they don't get Rodgers, is just to start Mason Rudolph this year and just bring in kind of a nobody to be the fourth quarterback on the roster before camp. That is certainly a possibility. The team likes Mason. The players in the locker room like Mason, and obviously he's going to have, time during OTAs to get himself ready. So you can certainly make an argument that he would be the best available option for the Steelers heading into training camp if Rodgers decides to hang up the cleats. But I do think that Pittsburgh will add a fourth quarterback to their roster before camp. All right. And I think that they would like to prefer, and they would prefer a quarterback that they feel gives them a chance to win this year because, let's face it, Cam Hayward only has 2 years left in his career, and they would rather try and win with a veteran quarterback that they feel like gives them a chance to win the whole thing than to maybe go with like a sixth-round rookie in Will Howard who really gives you no chance at winning the Super Bowl this year. So out of the outside options that are veterans, I do think if Rodgers retires, the guy that they will probably target is Kirk Cousins from the Atlanta Falcons. All right. And, I think the Steelers have kind of known that Cousins is kind of in their back pocket in case Rodgers retires because nobody else is looking for quarterbacks right now. So Cousins is 36 years old. He's not as old as Rodgers, but he did show some signs of aging last year. He's always brought good size to the table. He's got a ton of experience. He's been a franchise quarterback in this league for a long time, will not be scared of the big moment or anything like that. He's been there and he's done it. He's played in West Coast offenses like Arthur Smith's, his entire career with, in Minnesota, and even before that with Jay Gruden with the Washington Redskins back in the day. And then he goes to the Falcons who run, lo and behold, a Sean McVay style offense. And, I think that he would be, technically a good scheme fit for the Pittsburgh Steelers if he were to be traded here. My scouting report on him, he does a lot of the nuances of the position really well. He's a very smart, intelligent quarterback, can mentally process a defense very fast. He does attack the middle of the field, something Russell Wilson and Kenny Pickett never really did. He's got excellent leadership qualities. He's a good guy. He's going to be a good ambassador for the organization if they trade for him. He is accurate, throws with anticipation, and can throw with good touch. But the cons, the arm strength, he's not really an athlete. He's never really been a mobile quarterback. The playmaking upside is not there. So you're really hoping for him to be just a pure pocket passer if he is the next quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the playoff record is not exactly great. I think he just has one playoff win in his entire career against the New Orleans Saints back when he was with the Minnesota Vikings. So not exactly a great record in the postseason either. And then you take a look at his advanced numbers last year. There's some things that are pretty decent. He got the ball out of his hands, pretty decently quick at 2.171 seconds average, the 11th in yards per attempt. So the efficiency was pretty decent. He was around league average in EPA per play, which was actually higher than guys like Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, and Aaron Rodgers last year, despite kind of a tough end to his tenure there in Atlanta, where they eventually replaced him with Michael Penix Jr. because kind of the last month that he played there in Atlanta was just putrid. Just one touchdown to 9 interceptions. Those last 5 games, he had 2 more picks than he had in the previous 9 games to start the season. He actually started the year pretty good, almost 70% completions, 17 touchdowns to 7 picks, and a quarterback rating, or passer rating, I should say, of over 100. But that really went by the wayside there in the final 5 games he started for the Atlanta Falcons. So the positive spin on Kirk Cousins, guys, is that he's going to be better this year because it's year 2 off of the Achilles. And if you know anything about Achilles injuries, year 2 is really when you make that full recovery. So, all the arm strength issues that we saw from Kirk last year really fell off a cliff in that regard. the people that would be positive about a Kirk Cousins season this year in Pittsburgh would say, well, it's year 2, so the arm strength is going to come back. But at 36 years old, I really am kind of skeptical that that is going to be the case. But a big question when it comes to Kirk and whether or not the Steelers are going to go get him is how much of Kirk's contract would Pittsburgh be willing to pay if they end up trading for him? It's definitely an interesting situation because next year it's pretty affordable, as far as quarterback contracts go. $27.5 million, it's still a pretty penny, but it's not terrible. But then in 2026 and 2027, you're on the hook for $45 million a piece. And if Cousins stinks next year, then you're still on the hook for that money. And it's I don't know if I want to get into that and make a 3-year commitment to Kirk Cousins when he looked that bad to finish his season back in 2024. So a potential Cousins trade and what I think it would look like is pretty similar to what the Justin Fields trade looked like between the Steelers and Bears, where it would be a conditional 6th-round pick that could turn into a 5th-round pick if Kirk plays 50 or more percent of the Steelers' offensive snaps this year. Because I think the Steelers would have to take on a good chunk of Kirk's contract, I do think that you're not going to be paying too much for that. And I do think that it is the case that the more money you take on in Kirk's contract, the lower price tag you're going to have to pay to Atlanta to land him via trade. So let me know what you guys think down there in the comments section. Would you accept this trade to land Kirk Cousins to be the next starting quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers if Rodgers retires? Give me an A for accept or D for decline. This is going to be the pinned comment on today's show. YouTube's going to throw you an ad break here in just a couple of seconds. When that happens, take advantage of that time by answering today's pinned question with an A or a D. So now let's go into who is the better option, at least on paper, between Kirk Cousins or Mason Rudolph for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I think on paper, it's still very clearly Kirk Cousins, even though he definitely struggled to finish his time there in 2024 with the Atlanta Falcons. When you compare the stats for Cousins and Rudolph last year, Kirk still had the better season, at least in terms of the stat sheet. The completion percentage was higher. The yards per attempt way outshined Mason Rudolph in that regard. The EPA per attempt, very similarly. The interception percentage was lower than Rudolph's, even though Cousins, like we said, only threw 1 touchdown and 9 interceptions in his final 5 weeks. And Mason Rudolph was still throwing a higher percentage of interceptions than Kirk was. And then he had the higher passer rating on the season quite significantly there. So I do think Cousins is the better quarterback. But, with that said, is Cousins so much? Is he clearing away the better option compared to Mason Rudolph, where you're willing to take on the money on his contract and give up a draft pick next year in order to get him in your building? I could certainly see why some people would be like, you know what, we're not going to win this season anyway if we don't get Rodgers, and some people think we're not going to win this year anyway, even with Rodgers. So why even bother picking up this contract, and why give up a draft pick for somebody that's only going to be here for 1 year, and then we're going to be drafting a quarterback anyway in 2026. So I could certainly see both ends of the argument here. Cousins would certainly help you win now, but is it really worth trying to win now, I guess, is kind of the argument that the other side would make there. So pick your quarterback down there in the comments section. If you had the choice between trading for Kirk Cousins or riding with Mason Rudolph as your starting quarterback this year, type KC for Kirk Cousins or type MR for Mason Rudolph. In just a second here, I'm going to tell you about our sponsor today at Fanatics. And while I'm telling you about Fanatics today, let me know who you would prefer as the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers this season. With that, let's have word from our sponsor here from Fanatics. And, we don't know who the Steelers starting quarterback is going to be at this point in the offseason, but we know DK Metcalf is going to be that quarterback's prized weapon. All right, so if you guys want to get DK Metcalf's Steelers jersey, he's going to be wearing the number 4 here in Pittsburgh. You guys can get his jersey today when you go to chatsports.com/DK. That's our special link that I have put down in the comments and description of today's show. If you click that link and you make a purchase, Fanatics sends us here at Steelers Talk part of the proceeds, so it helps out the channel. So if you're planning on getting a DK Metcalf jersey anyway, this would be a great way to do it because you get to help out the channel in the process. So go to chatsports.com/DK to get your DK Metcalf jersey in your closet today. So now let's talk about some other potential quarterback options outside of Mason Rudolph and outside of Kirk Cousins, who I do think are probably the most likely options outside of Aaron Rodgers at this point in time. Now, some people would say just ride it out with Mason Rudolph or with Will Howard, the 6th-round rookie. And I just don't think it's fair to him to do that. All right, he's a 6th-round pick. I do think he needs time to develop behind a veteran quarterback. I don't think he's ready to play in an NFL game right away. And I think if you throw him out there, he's going to struggle and it's going to look really bad on him. All right, I think that for Will's sake here, I would rather get a veteran quarterback that starts. I would even start Mason Rudolph ahead of him just to give Will time to develop at least a little bit during the season, because based on what we saw from him at Ohio State, he wasn't even like a high-end college quarterback, in my opinion. And I think that the chances of him going from like a good but not great college quarterback to a good NFL starting quarterback in one offseason are pretty slim. So personally, I'm not really in the start Will Howard week 1 camp, at least I'm not. But some other veteran quarterback options that they could think about: Ryan Tannehill. He's kind of pseudo-retired, but he did meet with the Minnesota Vikings this offseason. It seems like if the right opportunity presents itself, he might be willing to come back and play NFL football at 36 years of age. And the last time that he played in an Arthur Smith offense back in 2022, he was arguably like a top 10 producer at the position, over 230 yards per game passing, 33 touchdowns, just 7 interceptions, and a really good passer rating of over 100 at 106.5. Now, obviously, he was a younger man during that season, and he hasn't played in an NFL game since week 10 of 2023. All right, and he took last year off. So the fact that, or the idea that he's going to come in at 36 years of age and be that same 33 touchdown, 7 interception type of guy that he was with Arthur Smith back in 2020, the chances of that are pretty darn slim. So I'm not even convinced Ryan Tannehill would beat out Mason Rudolph here for the starting job here in Pittsburgh if they end up signing him. Another guy to consider that's a free agent is Carson Wentz. We talked about him on the show earlier this week. Not the most accurate quarterback in the world, and I don't think that is something Mike Tomlin necessarily wants. But hey, back in 2021, he was the starting quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts, and he actually played pretty decently. Now, he wasn't the focal point of that offense. Jonathan Taylor was, and then the defense was the focal point of that team there in Indianapolis. But that's a very similar setup to what the Steelers are trying to do here in Pittsburgh. They want the run game to be the focal point of the offense. They want the defense to be the focal point of the team and the reason why they're winning football games. And, Wentz did protect the football during that 2021 season. But the issue with Wentz is that he hasn't started and been a full-time starter since 2022 when he had his worst season as a starter with the Washington Commanders, where he got benched mid-season. So that's a long time to go without being a starter to all of a sudden thrust a starting position on in a win-now season. And his lack of accuracy, I think, would definitely turn Mike Tomlin off. Then Teddy Bridgewater. He came back at the end of last year after coaching high school football for a while. I think he ended up winning a high school state championship as the head coach of his high school team. And then he came back and he actually played in the wild card game or in the divisional round game versus the Commanders when Jared Goff got banged up. But Teddy hasn't been a starter in the league since 2021 when he had a stint as the starter for the Denver Broncos. So that's been a long time since Teddy Bridgewater has been a starter in this league, and kind of similar to some of these other guys. I just don't know if he's going to be able to come in and immediately fill that role to the level the Steelers are going to be expecting. And then, if you want to get a younger option, Will Levis, I think, is a guy the Tennessee Titans would be willing to let go of here because they just drafted Cam Ward. Will Levis was the previous starting quarterback. I definitely think they'd be willing to let him go. So if you're looking for kind of a high upside type of guy that maybe, you get him and maybe he works out, maybe he doesn't. He's big body. He's a good athlete. He's a rotational passer, all these different things. And he's an interesting project because of those things. But he's not an established winner in the league at the NFL level. He's 5-16 as a starter in this league, and you can ask Mason Rudolph. He wasn't that good, even though Rudy got benched for him twice last year in Tennessee. But Levis certainly has his accuracy issues as well, so if you're going to put that criticism on Carson Wentz, you certainly have to levy that against Will Levis as well. And, is it really a good idea to recreate the quarterback room that led to the first overall pick here in Pittsburgh? I just don't know if I love this idea either. Levis has some nice competitive toughness and some really great physical tools, but honestly, I just don't know if he's exactly what the Steelers are looking for right now. So long story short, we've done this entire segment here to just kind of show you that the options that the Steelers have outside of Aaron Rodgers are not very good. Now, maybe Rodgers comes in and he stinks, and it's similar to like the Jets situation, but also maybe it's like the Minnesota Vikings situation when they brought in Brett Favre in 2009. Maybe it's like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when they brought in a 43-year-old Tom Brady. Both those guys are Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers is a future Hall of Fame quarterback. He's over 40 years old, but I think that a lot of the issues in New York had nothing to do with him. It was a lot to do with infrastructure and coaching and scheme and all that stuff. Plain and simply, I think that the Steelers have the highest upside with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback this year. And if they can't get him, I think they're in big trouble. So take your pick down there in the comments section. If Aaron Rodgers retires, who's your pick at QB1? Is it Mason Rudolph? Is it Will Howard? Is it Kirk Cousins? Is it somebody else? Let me know what you guys think down there in the comments section, and that'll be it for today's edition of Steelers Talk by Chat Sports. Make sure you guys click that subscribe button for more in-depth and informative Steelers videos like this one every single day right here on YouTube.